everybody, welcome to That Expert Show, where you help run the show. I'm Anna Canzano. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a great topic lined up today. We're talking about naturing. Basically, it's the idea that we've all been taking more walks around the neighborhood lately. We're in the midst of a global pandemic with all the social distancing, the physical distancing that we've been asked to do. We've been spending a lot of time outdoors, keeping that distance from people, hitting up the nature areas around our community. And I don't know about you, but I feel like when I'm with the kids, I feel more compelled to be educating them about the things that we are seeing, maybe because we've been homeschooling as well. So I reached out to the person that I know is the best expert on this topic. Basically, the person I know who is phenomenal at getting kids excited about nature and observing what is around them. She is the CEO of Camp Wilani, which is a summer camp. It includes a family camp. She's a former regional director for the YMCA. She's been a backcountry ranger and interpretive park ranger, so she's got tremendous experience in this field. I'm excited to talk with her, and she joins us live right now. Alyssa Kobrin, thank you so much, Alyssa, for being part of That Expert Show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Anna. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, I think what's awesome about you, because I've witnessed you in action, just in a casual manner on nature walks, you really do such a great job of sparking the curiosity about nature in children. And I think they naturally have some curiosity, but it really helps when you have a grown-up that has that infectious energy about it.
Yeah, you nailed it. Like, kids are going to be excited if you're excited. And I love the natural world. I love nature. I love learning about animals and plants and flowers, and I'm curious. And that's the key, is fostering and cultivating curiosity in kids. Curiosity about the natural world, no matter where they are. And that's the key, really, is just being curious. You don't have to be an expert on everything. You just wonder about it.
And that is one aspect of exploring nature that I think a lot of us get wrong. Is I feel like when I'm out with our kids, and we have kids ranging in age from 4 to 17, I feel like I need to be a teacher, so to speak, and name things and be more official and be looking things up on my phone and telling them what that is called if they want to know what it's called. And you have a completely different take on that.
I do. And so the object of going out and exploring nature is not necessarily to find the name of a thing. In fact, by the time kids get to the point of figuring out the name, they kind of shut down about it because they feel like they've answered the question. They've checked the box. What is it? It's this. And so if you can actually stay away from naming things right away and go deep into exploring what the object is, then you can come up with the name later if that's even important. It is fun at the end to figure it out, but you start out just by deeply exploring an object in nature, getting close to it, touching it, smelling it, making sure it's not poison oak, and getting deep into it. And then from there, you can be like, yeah, I wonder what the name of this is. And that comes in a framework that comes out of UC Berkeley, and it's I notice, I wonder, and it reminds me of. So this process helps to build new neural pathways in kids as they're discovering the natural world. And so if you pick up something, the first question you ask is, what do you notice about it? Well, I notice it's brown. I notice it's shaped this way. I notice, it seems to be wet on one end and dry on the other. So all these different things you notice. I notice it's fuzzy. What do you wonder about it? I wonder where it came from. I wonder why it's fuzzy. I wonder what these things are for. And then the last thing is, it reminds me of. And this is the big moment where those new neural pathways connect in the child's brain. Well, it reminds me of a pyramid. It reminds me of toilet paper. It reminds me of my stuffed animal. It reminds me of this spiky ball I play with. So whatever it is, it reminds them of something familiar. And in that moment, the connection is truly made. So we use the notice, I wonder, it reminds me of framework every time.
I love that. And we will definitely jot that down. We always create a tip sheet based on every episode so that people can go back and reference it. And it summarizes the key points that we cover. So we will make sure to include that in the tip sheet that we post on our website after the show. I also want to invite people. We are doing this live, and it's live for a reason, because if you have questions for Alyssa, I want to invite you to post your questions. We're monitoring the feeds to see, what questions you might have, and I will ask them of her as we go along. I think it's interesting that you are able to take aspects of nature and relate them and remind kids, of what this is like and use their imaginations. I've been on nature walks with you, and there are things that you have mentioned during nature walks that our little ones still talk about to this day. And it's the difference between witch's hair and old man's beard in identifying, I think it was 2 different types of lichen.
That's right. That's right. And it's really easy because they look super similar, The difference is one is static and one's dynamic, or one is stretchy and one does not stretch, it'll break. And so it's just noticing those little differences between the two. And as that curiosity grows, the kids will deep dive and notice the difference between one pine cone and another pine cone, or a fir cone, and notice the differences between them. That is a lifelong skill. That is a skill that will help them in science, that will help them in math, that will help them in art and creativity and problem solving, is that curiosity, that deep noticing and comparing one thing to another about how they are alike or how they're different.
When you look at different objects on the ground, is it as simple as taking a leaf and examining that and noticing the differences between the types of leaves on different trees?
I'm glad you brought that up, Anna, because it just so happens that I have some leaves. So, for example, if you have, these are maple leaves from my yard, and there are lots of different kinds of maple. A lot of maples that you'll see in the Pacific Northwest are the big leaf maple, and that the leaves of the big leaf maple can become the size of a dinner plate. They become quite large. But this little maple from my front yard, one of the things you can notice immediately is the shape, right? You can count the number of little leaves on it, right? You can get up close and notice that the edges are jagged. Do you see the jagged edge?
Yes.
What does that look like? So when you look at that edge, what does it remind you of? What are some words that you can use to describe
It
that?
looks like a zipper to me, like the seams of a zipper, I suppose.
Zipper.
Was that a rhetorical question? Because I answered it.
No, that's a real question. I was asking you. So it can look like a zipper or a saw blade or teeth, sharp teeth or something like that. But that's bringing that cognitive recognition back into the object. So if you look deeply at something, you can notice those differences. For example, if you, for example, have a dogwood leaf, this is really common in the Pacific Northwest as well. But if you look at the edges of it, they're pretty smooth. They might have a little bumpiness to them, but they're pretty smooth. You can look at the veins of it and whether they're parallel or they're alternating. You can look at the size of it, the shape of it. Does it come to a point? And for example, there are lots of leaves that maybe fall into that category. Here, for example, is a rhododendron leaf. And so it has some similarities, but if you look closely, you'll be able to tell the differences. And the differences don't just come in their appearance, they also come in how they feel. The rhododendron leaf is really thick and waxy, and when you rub it, you can feel a really kind of texture like vinyl. And then if you're working with a different kind of leaf, like the dogwood leaf, it's a little thinner and finer. It feels just a little bit rough, but not fuzzy like a hazelnut leaf. It just pull out all of the descriptors you can, and you'll be able to start noticing and kind of writing down the differences between things. Another thing to notice is we have a lot of ferns here in the Pacific Northwest, and one of my favorite is the sword fern, this one. And some of the ways to identify sword fern really take looking closely. For example, the leaves are alternating. You can see that they're not even, they're alternating, right?
Yeah.
And then here, also, if you turn it over, it has spores on the back, which are its reproduction. I don't know if you can see that, but there's
Mm-hmm.
spores on the back. And then the most important thing, and why it's called a sword fern, is if you pull off one of the leaves, it actually has a little hilt at the end. You see it? Like a sword hilt. And the hilt is the handle of the sword, right? And
Yes.
so,
Oh, that's awesome.
so this is the this is a, go to war with your plant life. And then, so anything you can get curious about, and just with closer examination, you can start really seeing the ways that things are similar and the way that things are different. Texture, smell, the appearance of the stems, the appearance of the leaves, all of those things are ways that you can start getting kids curious and noticing. And then the last thing that I always recommend is journaling, is writing about, is not just describing them in words, but actually drawing the object. So we all keep nature journals in my program, and we all take different kinds of plant life and we sketch them using colored pencils and get really close and spend a lot of time mindfully looking at an object. And when you do that, you know it really deeply, and you will find out all kinds of things that you didn't notice before when you were just looking at it.
I love that idea. So, obviously age appropriate, depending on the age of your kid, to be able to take along just an empty notebook to give them the opportunity to do that when you're out on a nature walk to enhance the experience. And I love what you're saying, because I think I tend to just fall back on sight. Oh, look at that difference. Look at that difference. And I forget about the other senses in their observation of items from nature. So that's such a good reminder, the smell and the touch of things, and to go beyond just looking at the differences, but feeling the differences as well. I wanted to take a minute and say hi to folks who are joining us live. We have two different Charlene's, Charlene Simon and Charlene Adams, that are joining us on Facebook. Jill is joining us as well. If you happen to be joining us and want to share this with friends, that would be fantastic. Spread the word about the interview that we're doing right now. As you pick up these different objects, I'm thinking about all the different times that our girls have been inclined to pick leaves up or pick them off of trees. Or lately, our 6-year-old has been really fond of finding roots and trying to pull them out, which I can guess is not a good idea. I tell her, the roots are actually important to the living being, the living plant. It needs those roots to stay alive. Let's try to not pull out the roots. Can we talk about some maybe shoulds and should nots when it comes to interacting with nature? Because that is, for kids, a big part of how they experience nature.
Right. And so one of the things to consider when you're talking about sampling, like here I am holding up these samples of plants. So it would be hypocritical of me to go around and say, you can't do this. So let me explain how I harvested these and the criteria that I chose for harvesting certain things. So first of all, you're totally okay if an object is dead, down, or detached, right? So if a log is down on the ground, or sticks or leaves, anything that's fallen off a tree or off a living plant, or fur or scat, or anything that's no longer actually part of the organism, that's okay. You can poke at it with a stick, or you can pick it up or look at it. That's great. But if you want to sample something that is living, I often recommend that if it's younger kids, that an adult with some good sharp scissors or clippers chooses a sample that's robust and healthy and large, right? So if you wouldn't want to like clip a small, seasonal flower, or a plant that's a baby just trying to grow. You want something that's well established, large, has lots of leaves or needles or anything to spare. This birch branch that I harvested is off of a very large tree, and it's doing really well, and it has lots of leaves, and I felt really good taking a nice clean pair of sharp shears and taking a sample of it. You don't want to rip a branch or a leaf off of a sample, because that ripping leaves a gap that can invite disease and other things into the plant and can cause long-term damage and hurt the plant. So just making sure that you use a nice pair of sharp scissors or clippers, and that the plant is well established and large and healthy and has the sample to spare, I
And
would say.
what about living things? Because our youngest one, whose name is Sojourner, and she lives up to her name, she sojourns her way through nature. Uh, she's quite fond of slugs and caterpillars and snails. She will be inclined to pick up snails and slugs. She'll often try to rehome slugs. She'll find a baby slug and try to place it with a larger slug because she assumes they're members of the same family, which is adorable. And yet I'm hesitant about that because I feel like she should probably just leave it in peace and not disturb it.
I think that she's my secret soul mini sister because I totally felt that way as a kid, and it's really is difficult not to anthropomorphize the natural world and see through our own lens, right? It's hard to like see through a slug's lens. There is a book that I have called The Secret Life of Slugs and Snails, though, so I recommend it.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think that gently and mindfully touching or looking closely at beings as they're working their way through life, searching for food most of the time, right? Just looking for food is fine, but we don't want to take them away from where they're existing. They might have a family that they're going to take food back to, right? They might already have, they're really good at staying within their system of survival, and they don't venture away from where they should be most times. One of the most common things we see, especially when I was in the Park Service or, as I'm working in the backcountry, is that, deer, which are having all their adorable dappled fawns right now, they're so cute. We have several out at camp right now. They're so cute. Is that their hiding mechanism is to wrap themselves up into a little ball and hide it low in the brush. Like they tuck themselves down and they hide in the brush, and then mom goes off and forages for food and baby just lays low. A lot of people will find a baby and say, oh, it's lost, its mom is gone, I have to take it to wildlife services, or, and the truth is like that baby's right where it's supposed to be. Mommy left it there. Please don't take it from its home. So, I would say that with any animal that you don't need to rehome it. It is where it's supposed to be. And being curious about it, looking really closely. I love a hand lens. A hand lens is a really inexpensive, easy thing that's super kid friendly. So in our Camp Fire Wilani outdoor school program, we have a hand lens that goes over the child's neck, and it has a nice comfortable string that goes around it or lanyard, and it attaches to it so they don't lose it. And then they can look very closely at things without hurting them or really needing to pick them up. I mean, some creatures out there it's not good for us to pick them up, not alone them. For example, at our camp, we have rough-skinned newts. They can have toxins in their skin, and they don't really like how it feels to be handled by us. So we look closely at them with a hand lens and don't actually handle them.
Oh, interesting. So let me follow up on that because sometimes we'll be, obviously most of the nature's areas around here also are jogging paths for people who like to do, runs in the wilderness. And so what will happen is we'll see a slug or a snail that's in the midst of the jogging path. And she'll want to move the snail out of the path of a potential runner because she's thinking, if I don't move the snail, it might get crushed by someone passing by. What is your thought on that?
I do that too. I do it.
Okay.
I do that as well. So what I typically do is where I see them, I'll get a nice soft leaf or something so I don't touch them with my bare hands and very, very gently move them. And there will be people out there who disagree with me because, their little foot is stuck to the ground. We don't want to rip them off of something. But a lot of times, especially if they're on dirt, they'll bring the dirt and pine needles with them when they're moved. It's stuck to the bottom of their little foot. And I just wrap them in a leaf and gently put them on the other side of the path. I do that. It might be controversial, but I just don't want them to get crushed either.
Right.
So
See,
yeah,
you
we're
and
very
Soji are
lucky.
soul sisters, your spirit
Yeah.
animal soul sisters. Um, and so the other thing that comes to mind, and I was just talking about this with a friend, is the idea of earthing. I had never heard of this actual term, but I've seen it in action with our own kids and other people's kids when they essentially wind up barefoot in the mud, kind of looking like hobbits. I mean, they're just, they might wind up shirtless and they are fully immersed in nature. And there is something to that that I guess grown-ups can take from, right?
That's exactly right. So there's a reason that hobbits are happy little folk, and that's because they are walking around barefoot in the dirt all day long. So we live in a world that separates us from nature. We live in a world where, we have shoes and socks, and we are separated from our environment by concrete, by houses, by cars, by things. And there is something still in our DNA. There is something still stuck deep inside our genetic memory that needs connection to the natural world, that needs to be close to it. There are actually microbes in dirt that are good for us, that make us feel good. And in an age where so many people, from young kids to adults, are on their devices all day long, that that has clinically been proven to cause heightened anxiety, feelings of low self-worth, all kinds of detrimental mental health things. And so getting out, getting dirty, really being part of the natural world of which we are a part. We are truly a part of that. We are not separate from it. So getting out there and getting dirty and exploring is great for mental and physical health. And it also fosters that curiosity. You'd be really surprised at how much better kids feel after being outside. In our outdoor school and kid programs, devices aren't allowed, right? Our camp programs. And kids always say at the end that they don't want to leave. They don't want to go home. They feel so good. This is the most relaxed that they've been in a long time. And part of that is just getting close to the earth and just, making mud masks and, just playing around and digging in the dirt or making like a little circus. Sometimes we'll plot off a piece of earth and they get really close to it with their hand lenses and like make a little nature circus, just like a microscopic one. It's so adorable. Anyway, but just like that is so good and so necessary and so part of who we are as human beings on the planet, and it feels great. And I would recommend it for adults too. I have a friend who lives in Marble Mount who even in the winter will dress like in warm winter clothes and walk barefoot out in the dirt even when it's cold outside, because she just said it's just incredible experience and she feels better. So
I think it's a
yeah.
good reminder because it's something that I've learned over time as our girls have gotten older. It's not that hard, and it's not for every kid. Like, there are some kids that want really nothing to do with getting dirty, and that's perfectly fine. That's just not their jam. But for others, I've learned that they do enjoy immersing themselves that way, and it's just a matter of bringing along a change of clothes and understanding that that first set of clothes is probably just going to go right into the wash when we get home. And it's been a good experience since. And I think it's worth reminding people too that I think when sometimes we talk about going into nature, we think, oh, we have to go and find the nature area that's within a reasonable drive of our home, or to a larger extent, oh, we got to drive to Yellowstone. You gotta get to Yosemite to really immerse yourself in nature. But the irony is that we have nature all around us, whether you live in an urban environment, a suburban environment, or a rural environment. You just have to be practicing looking for it, right?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. Nature is everywhere. Especially in a city like Portland, which is it's a tree city and it's fabulous and has lots of parks everywhere. But you can be in a very urban environment and you can make meaning out of seeing nature in places that may not be very aesthetically pleasing or in places that surprise you. One example might be an empty lot. They demoed a building, right? It's got a big chain link fence around it. People consider it an eyesore. It's been sitting there for years. but look at the plant life that has sprung up. You see flowers, you see all kinds of plants, things have made their homes there, things are living. What does that mean? What does that mean about the fortitude of nature, about the unending spirit of the natural world, that it can come up even in the most adverse of circumstances? How can we be mindful about that plant's experience, like not necessarily in an anthropomorphic way, but how can we think about what energy it took for that plant to take root and thrive in what we consider to be a worthless place? And how can we incorporate that into our own selves through mindfulness and ideas about strength and fortitude and understanding?
I think that's so important to remember because, again, part of the irony there is that some of these attractions, the national parks and forests, we love them so much, we almost love them to death, where it becomes a problem. And just the people management of going to places like Yellowstone and there's a lot of work that actually goes into curating those parks and those experiences for the visitors.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that for people who want to do a deep dive into the natural world, there needs to be an understanding that parks are not Disneyland, and the greater massive populace that just want kind of this superficial experience in parks want that curated Disneyland experience. But if you really want to get deep into a place and get not only the awe of an incredible wonder of the natural world, but also to feel connection and to get mental and physical health benefits, get out of your car, get off of the paved walkways, take a backpack with the 10 essentials and a map and tell people where you're going and take plenty of water and go for a hike, like go hiking and actually immerse yourself. I love it when people get curious about places that are off the beaten path, and to immerse themselves deeply in those things without it just being a carnival ride. You don't shoot through Yellowstone in 2 days or a day. I mean, I've seen people come to national parks. So what's the best thing I can see in 4 hours? Like, you're going to take your picture, you're going to get your little badge, and you're going to move on, right? But if you really want to experience something, you choose a couple of things you really want to be a part of or want to see, and you spend a day with them, right? Hiking, experiencing, sitting. You don't have to be moving the whole time. Sit and feel and use all of your senses to hear and smell and feel the wind on your body, hear the sound of water running. I mean, just immerse yourself deeply. It makes a big difference for kids and adults.
That's fantastic. I wanted to thank Tamara, who posted on Facebook about this episode. She was saying that her girls like to pick flowers, so she decided that they needed to start identifying the flowers. That's perfectly fine. She's actually downloaded an app to identify them. They take pictures along the way and learn about it. And she's saying part of it is that she's hoping it'll help them to stop picking her neighbor's flowers as much. I think that's a fun idea as well, because, depending on the age of the kid, they may not be old enough to really create a substantial journal yet, but you can certainly, have that exploration after the fact to even to figure out, the names of flowers and to be able to label them as such.
Yes, and I'm not, opposed to that end moment of saying, oh, that's a Douglas fir cone, or actually finding out the name of things. I think it's more long-term and meaningful to go through that discovery, like go through that process of discovering what something is by feeling it and smelling it and touching it and observing it. But using an app, I mean, it's a great time to be able to incorporate technological advances into exploring the natural world. That is awesome. I think also I'm old school in that I love a good guidebook, right? Like, so my Pojar and McKinnon's Native Plants of the Pacific Northwest is like the tome for people exploring the natural world. It's got like waterproof pages and it's color coded and great drawings and photos. So I highly recommend it. I'm not being paid to say that. And But it really is like we all have that. And it'll teach you things that are really cool too, that you can't get from an app in the touching. For example, this is a ponderosa pine cone. Okay. So a lot of times you'll see the beautiful pondy, especially as you're going over toward the east side, but areas of Portland have it as well as you get drier, especially up the gorge. And these are huge, beautiful trees that have kind of a puzzle shaped bark. So you look closely and it might remind you of, that cognitive connection there of puzzle pieces. And you get close and you smell it, and it smells like maple syrup or vanilla or butterscotch, and you smell the tree. And then the cones, if you feel them, they're very prickly. They're kind of sharp. And so that understanding that can help you differentiate a very similar species called the Jeffries pine. They look very similar in a lot of ways, but the Jeffries pine has gentle cones. They are not prickly. So we call gentle Jeffries prickly ponderosa. So actually getting up and touching things and rolling them in your hands and noticing that is a great way to help identify something without even needing a guidebook, right? You just know what it feels like.
Is that the pine cone that has the mouse tail that comes out of it? I think you've mentioned that before.
That's Douglas fir. So yeah, the Douglas fir cone, if you find a Doug fir cone, you will see that the little seed tails look like a mouse. They have a mouse tail and feet hanging out of it. And there's like a story about, because Douglas firs are actually fire resistant. And so there's a story that we use with kids about animals running from a forest fire and the Douglas fir saying, hide in my cones. And so all the little mouse tails and feet are hanging out of the Douglas fir cone. And yeah, it's just finding stories and finding ways that entertain kids and make them able to relate to nature and make meaning out of it. I mean, that's the key to getting kids excited about always learning and always exploring. And that grows with their age. As they get older, they want to do deeper and deeper dives into things. Maybe they become a biologist, a botanist. Who knows where that curiosity will lead. But that's where it starts. Any scientific discovery starts with curiosity. It's curious. I wonder if it'll do this. It kind of reminds me of this thing. That's how scientists think. And this is a great way to foster that in kids.
And I love the fact that you can wonder, but not necessarily have to provide the answer to those questions on the spot. I mean, we always talk about how to teach our kids delayed gratification, and it's okay to jot those things down and say, I wonder, and go, look for the answers later, maybe after the nature walk, and you've had some time to reflect. Alyssa, thank you so much for this fabulous interview. I would love to be able to reference the resources that you have talked about and include those in the tip sheet. So we'll make sure to jot down the book that you mentioned, the guidebook that you mentioned, and hopefully maybe we can correspond about any other resources that might be good for families to enhance their experiences out in nature.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me, Anna. It was really fun.
And thank you for joining me for this episode of That Expert Show. So fun. I hope it inspires you to get outdoors with your family and look at the world around you a little differently, wherever it is that you live, in the city, in a suburb, or in the rural areas of our country. There is just so much to see. As I mentioned, we'll be posting a tip sheet on thatexpertshow.com. That's where we also feature all of our previous episodes. You can check out our YouTube page, subscribe if you'd like there, and subscribe to our podcast. We kick this content back out to you as an easy to listen to podcast on Apple iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. And connect with me on Facebook, if you will, on Twitter or Instagram. I love your ideas on the topics and guests that you think that I should be approaching and booking for future episodes. It's really a two-way conversation. Share this episode, if you will, with your friends and family if you think it'll help them. And I just really appreciate all the feedback that I get from you, because that's the whole nature of this show. It's called That Expert Show, but it is where you help run the show.